So, you mix cannamel, this material that comes from the stem of the plant, from the middle, and you mix it with cal, lime, right? Or lime and clay to make bricks, or to cast in position one whole wall. Just put boards either side of a timber frame and pack the material around it, and then the next day you take off the boards and you have the wall. Okay? In Spain they are making bricks. This is a more easily... Right, so I'm Steve Allin. I'm the director of the International Hemp Building Association, which we're based in Ireland, and our aims are to promote this system of building throughout the world, but with a really sustainable angle.
And so tell us a little bit about the International Hemp Building Symposium this year.
Okay, right. Well, we decided to bring the symposium. This is the second one. The first one we held in my own hometown of Ireland. The second one we've brought to Granada because nearby is a factory run by a lady called Monica Brummer making canna bricks, as she calls them. And I thought this was a very interesting subject and an interesting project that she was working on to bring everybody to and to see. So we chose Granada as the nearest town, and it's been very successful.
And tell us a little bit about some of the people that attended the symposium.
Well, there was people there from all over the world, experts in the actual building, academics who've been studying the material now for the last 5 or 6 years, a lot of builders, young builders, old builders, people who've been repairing old buildings in the past and discovered hemp, and younger guys who are building newer houses, and people who are wanting to establish either small-scale hemp building production facilities in parts of the world, and people that are working with social action groups, housing people in or trying to house people in more desperate need of housing than people would be in other parts of the world.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about the potential of using that for?
Well, the thing about building with hemp is that first of all you're producing hemp, and hemp has amazing qualities. Very many different products can be brought from it, but those products are the basics of what we need in our communities. They can provide not only employment and the production of resources, but they also produce employment and an element of social security. And it's those issues that we consider to be paramount in making the decision to start to produce hemp and to then use it for all the many uses you can use it for. The use of building is quite a simple way of processing, so it doesn't mean that you have to get into high-scale production straight away. You can do it with quite simple machinery and produce quite simple products that are then mixed with others that can provide this beginnings of establishing a hemp building industry in any location. But the establishment of that industry also has implications for food production, for textiles, for clothing, and other types of industrial composite materials. And this is something we're going to have to really look into, seeing as most of the materials that we're using at the moment and the resources we have are fossil fuel based. And this is definitely a situation that's not going to continue. So the production and the creation of a hemp production in any area has wide implications, and we see the establishment of hemp used for building as a very easy first step. The first person to use hemp was a man called Charles Rossetti. He was a man who repaired old medieval buildings in France, and he was looking for an infill that would work in the way that the old natural materials should do. And so what was happening was in France, they were plastering the outside of medieval buildings with cement, which was messing up the humidity regulation within the wall, and the walls were holding moisture. This was expanding the old original infill, which then cracked and broke. So he was looking for a material that would breathe in the same way as the old medieval materials of clay and lime and straw, and create something that was more modern and more easily to apply. So he built rebuilt this house using this material. The local cooperative that produced the material was very interested in what he did, and several people who were working for the company at the time took that idea and went and developed it themselves. That then spread, with my help and a few other people outside of France, into England especially, and into Canada. And so then other people in France could see the uses and the potential of this material, and started to applying it to existing natural building techniques, such as rammed earth or straw bale type building, and started to apply the material for new buildings in this way. And this opened up a whole other new possibility of how to use it for building new houses and much larger buildings as well. As the system originated in France, the early information was all in French, and so the French-speaking world isn't as large as the English-speaking world, and so I took it out into the English-speaking world and wrote a book, and that meant that suddenly the information was available to a much larger group of people. It was understood by the people who wanted to expand their existing hemp industries that this would be a great field to expand into. And so larger industrialists started to be interested in it, and there have been several large-scale buildings made of it that are great examples. But the first project to be thoroughly investigated was some houses in Suffolk in England, and they were built as comparison buildings with the more normal materials being used for most of the houses that were built, and 2 of them were built exactly the same proportions but using hempcrete. They were very thoroughly studied by the BRE and the Building Research Establishment in England, and they found the material to be superior to existing materials and that it had great potential. This really validated what we knew as natural builders, and it really started to have a real solid base from that point on. The first time I used industrial hemp myself was as a harness maker. I used to repair and make the harness for horses for horse-drawn taxi cabs in Killarney in Ireland, and the thread that you have to make to sew the leather together is made from hemp. It comes as a single strand thread, and you have to make multiple threads and wax them to make a durable thread to sew leather. So that was my first actual experience of using an industrial hemp material. Then I'd also studied textile design when I was younger, and so I started to realize that there was possibilities there. And when people started advocating the use of hemp for all the many thousands of uses it can be used for.
I'm sorry.
All right, okay, that's good.
To start with, when people started advocating.
Right. So when Jack Arrar wrote his book and showed all the many thousands of uses that was possible from hemp, I realized that this was the material that I'd been using to sew my leather together. I was then halfway through building my own house and read about this new development that had been made in France, and so I bought some of the materials, applied them to my own house as a plaster on the inside, and was so successful that many of my friends bought the remaining materials I had and asked me to plaster their houses, and I then started importing the materials and doing the work myself. A few years later, I started to realize that I was one of the few people doing this outside of France, and so I decided that the thing to do would be to travel to France, to have a look and see what people were doing there, and that culminated in writing a book. So I used my graphic skills and communication skills to write a book and to make it very pictorial so that it was easy for the layman to understand and explain quite complicated scientific theories that were starting to be evolved about how the material worked, but to try and explain that in very simple terms. The use of hemp materials for building is now spreading all over the world. There are houses, many of them in France, many in the UK. There are quite a lot in Spain now as well. There are starting to be houses built in Slovakia and the Czech Republic. There are houses in Australia. There's a planned house to be built in New Zealand. There are houses in Canada, many houses in Canada now. There are several in the United States. And we hope to be building them in Uruguay, in more of them in South Africa. There's one built in South Africa too. In Finland, in Italy, and we're hoping that we're going to be helping people in a lot of areas of Africa, building houses in township-type regions where they need to produce a good food, they need to produce something that can help them protect them from AIDS with their immune system, which is what hemp seed can do, and then to be able to teach them how to build their own houses using materials that will create a system where they have to use very little energy, and yet they can have a house that they can be proud of and that isn't some kind of small little shack. Okay, when I was very young and at college, in the early 70s in London, there was a report published by MIT called The Limits to Growth. And this was reported in the underground newspapers of the time as basically the fact that there was not enough resources on the planet for everybody to have what we understood as the American lifestyle, that there simply wasn't enough steel or energy or other resources for that to happen. And so that part of the alternative culture and lifestyle was very much influenced by that kind of expectation, that we were more expecting our fair share of what the planet had to offer rather than as much as we could get. And so everything involved in alternative ways of living on the planet with less of an impact, treading lightly on the land would be one of the ways that was used to describe that type of lifestyle. Using organic agriculture, homeopathic medicine or natural medicine, organic foods, that kind of thing, just led me into exploring and being interested in natural building techniques. And when I started to build my own house, I was only still learning about many of the materials, but the discovery of hemp was just a wonderful discovery. Like all new ideas, when you're challenging something that is a very basic activity, such as building, people tend to be very cautious about taking on something new because they know that what they do works. But what we have now is a tipping point in understanding. Before, houses were built very much for location, the volume of space they had inside them, the kind of fittings they had inside them, and it was all about luxury and economics to a certain extent. But the economics have shifted. Now it's about energy use. And so now these materials are starting to be focused on a lot more. But that we have a mountain to climb in changing people's lifestyles from many different angles. And it is really a change in lifestyles that we really need. And using natural materials to build with, changing the way that we do many of the things that we do, is going to be essential because of peak oil more than anything else.
But can I not build my house with hemp materials and not change my lifestyle? I mean, I understand you're going for the bigger goal of changing lifestyle, but as an intermediate step, can I not just build a house with hemp and that'd be my first step?
Well, the sheer act of the first act of building a house out of hemp means that you've immediately saved a lot of money, but you've also had an effect on the planet, so that's really good. But the way that you live your lifestyle in a hemp house is up to you. You can build a hemp house in any style you wish. It can look like a very organic, natural shape, or it can be very square and straight lines and very functional as what most people would expect. So in many ways, hemp material allows you to use natural materials in a way that allows you to still furnish your home and use it in the way that people would expect. You can go to a big store out at the edge of town and get a flat pack shelf, and you can screw it into the wall. You don't have to pre-plan where the shelf's going to go, as you might do in an earth-built house or in a straw bale house, where there you haven't really got any fixing points, whereas with the hemp and lime mix you can just screw straight into it.
So talk about attitudes about hemp in the UK and how it is in your country and in Ireland as far as perception of hemp and the work that still needs to be done.
Okay, right. The general public is becoming more and more aware of the possibilities of hemp. Recently I was involved in harvesting some hemp seed for food, and the local wives of the farmers around the area we were for harvesting were coming along to have a look with their husbands, and it amazed me how many of them, in fact every single one of them, knew all about hemp and its nutritious value. So it is becoming more and more material that people are familiar with the name, and they know automatically that it has many uses because they've read something about building, they've read something about the food, they've read something about the clothing possibly, and so it's a gathering understanding and awareness. And the involvements we've had with government bodies in Ireland, and the reaction I've heard from people in England and most other parts of Europe, is that if you have an end user for your material, then the government and the departments of agriculture are only too pleased to help you and assist you, because they are the ones who really do understand its potential. Now, the people in central government, the policy makers, they're not so sure because they're more lobbied, they're more influenced by central government. Like in Europe, we have another layer of government again, and these people are much more further removed from the day-to-day reality of what people need and what people understand. However, the central governing bodies of Europe, with the agricultural policy, did in the past recognize the potential for hemp and allowed subsidies for it. But some of those subsidies were abused, and they changed the way that they subsidized the production of hemp. Now they subsidize the producers to actually process the material, so the farmers then are able to be paid for the material by the processors because they're getting that subsidy. So the subsidy pays the manufacturers to pay the farmers for the material. So the farmers aren't just growing the material, getting paid for it and throwing it away, which is what was happening. So most government departments, if they understand that you have a material that you want to produce and that you have a processor that wants to process it, and that this has implications for employment and other production further down the line, they're not against it.
Of course, the United States, the biggest issue, of course, is this association with marijuana. And of course, I think a lot of people, like myself, are very curious. Well, how is it then, the opposition law enforcement in our country is that we won't be able to tell the difference. So can you talk a little bit about how that is managed and handled then in the UK?
That there is a lot of confusion about the difference between marijuana and hemp. And the people often cite scare stories of people growing marijuana in a hemp field. Well, this is absolutely impossible. Hemp grows much faster than marijuana. It's a robust industrial crop that grows straight up like a rocket. And if you tried to grow marijuana in a hemp field, it would be completely smothered by the hemp. The other thing that makes it impossible is that hemp goes to seed very quickly, and so there's a lot of male pollen in the air, and the whole aim of marijuana growers is to not allow pollination, so that they're developing bigger and bigger flowers. And this would not happen in a hemp field. So if anything, a hemp field is actually a disadvantage to marijuana growers. So the difference in appearance is also apparent. A marijuana bush is a big wide bush with many branches. A hemp plant just grows up straight and is grown in a very similar way to grain, to cereal crops. And so they're very close together. There's no room for branching out. We're just looking for a central straight stem. So you won't find marijuana crops in the middle of a hemp crop. It just doesn't happen. It's the total opposite aims of what you're trying to acquire. So the possibility of people then stealing hemp because it looks like marijuana, this has happened in a lot of early plantations where people were growing hemp, people were coming along and thinking, oh, that's a lot of marijuana, let's take it. But the thing is that if you then try to sell that as marijuana, it has no drug inside. So you're going to get a very bad reputation if that's what your aim is. And if anything, it's a way of stopping people selling it. In Ireland, in the past, there was the fear that the paramilitaries would steal the hemp and sell it as drugs. And I always used to say to the government officials, let them. It'll spoil their reputation as drug dealers.
That's good.
Yeah, that's true. So if you were going to talk to officials in the United States, I mean, you live in a country where it is legal and it seems to be fine, there's no issues, but what would you say to the Americans who are blocking this amazing plant that they grow?
Well, there's several reasons, I think, that A, it was made illegal in the first place, and B, that it still is. And I think that Jack Harrar, in his book, The Emperor Wears No Clothes, identified some of them. But I think one of the things that is never really mentioned is that cannabis prohibition came into effect shortly after alcohol prohibition had been ended. And during the prohibition of alcohol, a very large number of police officers had been employed and their positions invented, if you like. So there was thousands of police officers that were about to be unnecessary. Inventing another prohibition was a very handy way of maintaining that level of police officers. And the number of police officers that are now employed by all European governments is very much buoyed up by the war on drugs. But what you've got to remember is that the war on drugs is not a war on drugs, it's a war on people. And the fact that we now know that this plant, or we've rediscovered that this plant has so many beneficial uses, and to make a war on that, or the people that actually are aware of that and are using it day to day for whatever reasons they're using it, is absolutely suicidal. But unfortunately, the banks have got their claws into everything, because they have invented a system that is bound to collapse. They do not understand the mathematical limits to growth. If you have growth, there is only 3 different types of growth, of economic growth or any kind of growth. One is natural, where you start off growing quite fast and then level off to an optimum height, like a tree or a human being. The other one would be linear growth, which would be more a mechanical type of equation, where A plus B equals C, and it's just a nice straight line. But neither of those 2 types of growth are what we have with economics. What we have with economics is exponential growth. And exponential growth gets bigger and bigger and bigger until it starts to form a graph that is trying to go vertically. Now, if we look at all the resource usage on the planet for the last 150 years since we've had fossil fuels, the graph has gone very steadily to start with. This was quite an optimistic time to be alive. Everything was looking great. The sky was the limit. However, as we've approached the last 20 or 30 years, the sky is literally seen as the limit, and the line is trying to go vertical, which means that the logical conclusion to that is that in another few years' time, we will be using all the resources of the planet within a single second, which is obviously impossible. So bankers have created a system where unless more people come in on the pyramid scheme of borrowing money, you can't get more money into the system, because the other money is being paid back. And the trouble is that all the money that they create is made from debt. So it's only real in the future if it's paid back. And the only way you can pay it back is if there are endless resources there to equate to the money that you've borrowed that you have to pay back. So if we have a limit to the resources that we have on this planet, and as far as I know, we only have one planet, then we have to understand that the resources we have are finite, and we have to it's more a question of sharing them out rather than having more and more and more. And the debt that's been created, as you in America are all too well aware, is absolutely phenomenal and is equivalent to trillions and trillions, and that means that we'd need 2 or 3 planets worth of resources to pay back. So we're all living way beyond our means. And peak oil, which is true, the International Energy Agency have at long last come round to admitting to that, means that the cheap energy that has created the boom that we've had is now starting to get to be expensive energy. We've taken all the low-hanging fruit, and we've now got to climb a little higher in the tree to get what we need. And that means that all the factors of economics that they factor in as being at a level amount, level quantity, are now going to go through the roof. And we're going to get a situation where we in the West have to realize that it's not our empire anymore. We don't control the world in the way we used to. It's going to be a question of a much more equal type of distribution. So we need to get real. And people in ExxonMobil and Chevron, these people in Shell, they've got to get real. BP, they've got to get real and realize that they cannot limit what people are doing like this, because there'll be absolutely nothing of an economy or business to continue. As director of the International Hemp Building Association, our aims are to promote the use material and the use of this material so that it becomes common knowledge, so that when people are thinking about either repairing or building a new house, that they have that as one of the materials on their palette that they choose from. So it could be bricks, could be timber, could be steel, could be hemp and lime, could be hemp and clay, could be earth, could be straw, could be lots of different materials that you would choose from, but that's one of the ones that is known. And I often think it's a little bit like the 100th monkey syndrome, that once a certain critical mass is reached with the number of people who know about that material, it suddenly becomes common knowledge. And I think that coming to events like this, the Expo Cannabis in Malaga, you are reaching people that have a basic openness to those sort of ideas, but they don't know the information, they don't know the facts. And so you're just showing them that even though they might be more interested in getting high, whilst they're high, they might think about saving the planet. And while they're saving the planet, they might start doing something that is really positive and start using materials that are in some way sustainable. Or if they're not sustainable, at least they're building resilience.
So let's talk about facts. Explain in sort of an easy to understand way for everybody. What is the difference between industrial hemp and marijuana plants?
The cannabis plant is a very useful plant and a very malleable plant. It's very easy to change the qualities that it has with different breeding. And so over the thousands of years that people have used this plant, they've adapted it for different climates and for different uses. Some of them have been more for a medicinal herbal use, and some of them have been more for the industrial fibers. And so the plant that grows the marijuana bud is a much more delicate plant. It needs more careful tending. And the plant that grows the industrial fiber is grown as a cereal crop in hundreds of acres of fields. However, it's similar to the way that cattle have been bred. Some of them are very useful for beef, but you wouldn't expect much milk from them. Some of them are very good producing milk, but you wouldn't get much of a steak from them. Same thing with the cabbage family. Some of them produce Brussels sprouts, some of them produce turnips. It's a lot of different breeding over the years. And with cannabis, it's the same thing. One is a very fast-growing, tough industrial crop that just has one single stem, that has a lot of fiber, has some seed, and has this woody core. The marijuana plant also has the woody core and the fibrous stem, but the fibers wouldn't be as long and as uniform. And of course it has the flowers and buds, which is more its aim in production. And the resins that are in the marijuana plant are only in very minuscule amounts in a hemp plant. As the Chinese used to say, may you live in interesting times. However, that was more of a scary warning than a reassuring blessing. And we are entering into very changing times. And we are entering a kind of tipping point, if you like. And so I would like to think that my children can grow up in a world where the community around them, the governments that are above them or around them, are aware of the realities and are looking to protect their citizens. And so I would see that the establishment of localized hemp production facilities that are producing materials to clothe and to house and to feed their inhabitants in a local way that's secure is very important, and that's what I would hope to see in the future. There's been a lot of talk about sustainability, but the sustainability of sustaining what we are doing at the moment on the planet is probably not possible. So it's more a question of resilience building, if we're really honest. We have to prepare for the type of shocks that just might happen. The systems we have built to exist on this world at the moment are very sophisticated, but very frail because of that. And what has happened in Japan recently and what is happening in America as we speak, with tornadoes ripping the place apart, shows how our systems are very vulnerable to nature. And so we should really be thinking of working with nature than against it. And hemp provides us with the most perfect tools to do that. What people found out with Fast Food Nation was a great example of how something that we all participate of, fast food, but the implications of the production of that were horrendous. And it's the same with many of the things that we use today. The oil that we use is not fair trade oil. It's bought in a way that means that dictators rule and people are suppressed. If your clothing also means that people have to work in sweatshops, then obviously, how can you feel good about wearing that clothing? If the food that you eat, the clothing you wear, and the houses can all be produced and purchased by people in a way that means that it's beneficial to that society, especially the society around you, then that's what we should be doing. And so by eating organic or by choosing to use natural materials to build with or to travel with or to do anything with, means that we are preparing the future for our children that we would like them to live in. And if we think that just by ignoring these things they're just going to go away, they're not. We have to actually do something. And so every time you buy a natural product, whether it's an organic product or a fair trade product or something that's made from hemp, you're helping that. And those products might not be perfect, but they're a step in the right direction. And every step we make in the right direction is further along the road. There are already many campaigns in America, like Vote Hemp and other groups like this, that are trying to lobby politicians and change legislation. And many of the states in America have already done this. It's really the federal government that seems to be the problem. And they cannot think of losing the jobs of all these police officers they've got. The other main problem you've got in America is the fact you've got a privatized prison service. And it's in those people's interest to have this vast amount of people you have in jail imprisoned. Do you know that you have 4 times the number of people in jail per capita than China does? And yet everybody always bleeps about human rights in China. This is a human rights issue. And so having that prejudice encouraged by mass imprisonment of the population means that it's very hard to get all the other aspects of the plant across. Well, I have nothing against the medical use of cannabis. It's obviously a very useful drug, and it has very little side effects compared to side effects like Prozac, which has a list as long as your arm of things that could happen to you. And so if chemical drugs can be marketed in that way, certainly no reason why herbal medicines can't be regulated like that and sold. However, herbal medicines are getting attacked as well. You know? So really in communities people are already just doing it for themselves. From what I hear, Detroit is a prime example where people are just taking the control of their society into their own hands because the people in control have washed their hands of it and just walked away. And so it's going to be down, those sort of things are going to happen in many parts of the world and are already happening, where the central government doesn't have the resources to control or even to provide. So now it's down to local communities to do things for themselves. And one of the things they can do is to think about where they're going to get the resources for everyday living from, and to encourage their farmers to grow things that aren't controlled by some genetically modified patenting office. God, you could really start getting radical if you want. You ever seen Food Inc?
Yes, definitely.
I don't know how that guy with that seed cleaning machine, I mean, he lives in America, he's in his 80s, you can get a machine gun in any supermarket. I don't know how those Monsanto guys got onto his land. I just, like, what the hell are you doing? Get out. If I was that age.
So we got...
One other thing I'd like to say is why, as far as the need for creating these local sustainable communities, what role does hemp have to play, or should hemp or could hemp be playing in the creation of local? Why should hemp be at the heart of local sustainable communities? Why should local communities want to embrace industrial hemp for their...
Many of the things that we consume or use are transported vast distances these days. And so if we are expecting to have our energy and our food and our clothing all shipped from very diverse parts of the world, that all adds to the susceptibility of the sophistication of our society. And so by making things more local, you're more aware of exactly where they come from. It's supporting local employment, which is really important, and it makes connections between people in a community, which makes a community stronger. The more that we're interacting with each other, the butcher is buying things from the baker, and the baker's buying things from the farmer, and the farmer's buying things from the local fruit producer or whatever, or seed producer, or machinery producer, then everything is working like a web. And if you try to strain that web, it's much stronger because everybody can see who's holding each end of the thread. Whereas if everything's diversified and if you're expecting to ship things from A to B to C to D, that's not local, that's not sustainable, and it's not secure. And food security is going to be very important. Anyway, was wandering off a bit there, but that's
It's all right.
everything. That's the trouble. Is everything's connected to everything else. You know, you can't. You know, trying to separate out one particular thing. I know that for you, what you're trying to do, and it's I'm so busy connecting things that it's hard to separate things out and see things just from one angle. And even though it's the Hemp Building Association, even just that means that it's so connected to everything else that hemp can produce, or that the way we build, the way we use energy, the way we transport things, everything is connected. And that's the thing about the way businesses and governments think, is they think very separated. They have a department of education over here, and they have a department of science over here, and a department of health, and yet they don't talk to each other. It's the same in the world of academia as well. People have these little specialized bits of knowledge, and that's all they know. But it's not, the world's not like that. It's much more like Russian dolls. You know, my heart is inside my body is inside my family is inside my community is inside the world. It's all connected, it's not separated. There's no break between that. In the same way, there's no break between me and you. There's molecule connection all the way from me to you. There's nothing, there's no space really. It's all filled with something.